As a physical therapist, I've seen the same mobility issues in weightlifters over and over and over again. Now, these restrictions always lead to some sort of pain, injury, or even a plateau in terms of how much you can lift. So today we're talking about 3 areas that you can't really afford to ignore if you want to keep lifting weights. Starting from the bottom, the first area is called ankle dorsiflexion. We naturally go into this motion whenever we do something like a squat or a lunge. Now, you'll know if it's tight because your heel will tend to lift up off the ground the deeper you go. Now, doing a squat or lunge with the heel up isn't a bad thing if you're trying to train ankle stability. If you're trying to train strength and trying to move as much weight as possible, you don't want the heel to lift up. The foot has to stay completely flat with weight distributed across the entire foot the whole time. That way we have the most stable platform to push off of so we can actually move the most weight. Some common compensations I've seen are people will turn their feet out and then they squat down. This forces the foot to go into something called pronation, where the arch will flatten out. Now, it'll also pull the knees together in a way that is unnatural for that motion and can cause problems there. Another compensation that we'll see is people will squat by leaning farther forward with the upper body. Now, they'll keep the heels down, but the farther forward you lean, the more stress is placed on your low back and hips, meaning you are more susceptible to having some sort of injury there. Everybody is different in terms of anatomy, and then some people will lean farther forward when they squat naturally. Some people will lean farther back because they can, based on how long their thigh bone is. But regardless of how you are structured anatomically, improving your ankle dorsiflexion is going to help you perform a squat in a safer and less injury-prone position. Now, an easy way to do this is go find a wall. Hopefully you have one of those. Hands up on the wall, put the ankle or the foot behind you that you want to stretch, and then drop the knee and then push down into that foot, trying to keep the heel on the ground. Now, you should feel a stretch somewhere in the ankle joint, or you might even feel it in the Achilles tendon. Either way, continue to stretch that, and then over time, that'll improve how deep you can squat safely. The next area we're going to talk about is hip rotation mobility. Hip rotation is important for doing any sort of deep squat or deadlift or lunge. It's also important when it comes to doing any sort of twisting motion where you're standing up. Because the hip can only rotate so much when it's tight, we will try and compensate to get additional mobility, either by twisting the knee or twisting the low back, and this can cause issues there. Now, going back to something like a squat, the deeper you go, the more internal rotation you need to complete that movement. If the thigh can't rotate enough, then the body will naturally try and compensate and find some other way to get deeper, similar to what we talked about with the restriction in ankle mobility. Your body is smart and it'll find ways to continue to get more motion. Now, this is often a problem because these other areas that are compensating are then exposed to more stress than they're supposed to be. Now, long term, you want to have flexible hips because it's great for your knees, hips, and back. A way I like to do this is to stand on one leg, and you can hang onto something if you need to for balance, and then try and twist as far as you can one way. So with my chest going towards the camera, I'm stretching into what's called external rotation of the hip. And then if I go all the way the other direction, this is stretching into internal rotation of the hip. Obviously, you could do one or the other or both, depending on what's tight. Regardless, doing this stretch, over time you'll improve the hip mobility, and then you will limit any sort of compensation when you're moving. The final thing we're talking about is called thoracic extension. Now that's just a fancy way to describe how far backwards your mid-back can bend. This is essential for any sort of overhead lifting as well as things like a front squat because it'll help keep your chest up. Using an example of overhead press, if my mid-back is tight and I try and lift overhead, the weight will be out in front of me because the mid-back can't bend backwards far enough. Obviously, with something that's very heavy, you can't hold this position because it's much harder based on the angle of pull on the shoulder. What people will do is they will bend backwards with the low back, placing the lumbar spine into what's called extension. Now, when we're lifting heavy weights, you don't really want your low back flexed or extended because that position is prone to causing injuries. So what you'll have to do is stretch out the mid-back so that you don't need to make that compensation. It's also important for shoulder health because the shoulder blade glides along the rib cage, and depending on how far back we can lean in terms of mid-back extension, that changes the angle that the shoulder blade is at. So if we're stuck hunched forward, the shoulder blade stays tilted forward, meaning that we can't reach up overhead as much as we should be able to, and this will cause issues in the shoulder joint as it tries to compensate. An easy way to improve this is to get down on your knees and elbows, make sure your knees are somewhat close to your elbows, and then do a cat-cow in this position. So what you'll do is you'll arch your back up towards the ceiling and then drop your chest down towards the floor, alternating back and forth. Another option is to do a child's pose, but instead of doing a standard child's pose, you're going to put your hands farther out in front of you and then drop your chest towards the ground. When the hands are farther out, you'll feel more of a stretch through the mid-back with this motion. Addressing these areas is not only going to help you lift better, but it's also going to help you stay in the gym so you can continue to lift and be strong as you age. So don't ignore them. If you found this video helpful, I would appreciate it if you could hit the like button. Otherwise, if you have questions, leave them in the comments. And then if you want to subscribe to my channel, I talk about how we can build physically fit and functional bodies that will last over time.